now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome back to the World Over Live. Head of the papal household, Archbishop Georg Ganswein, recently gave a fascinating talk about the nature of the papacy since Pope Benedict's retirement. To explore that and much more is a member of our papal posse, editor-in-chief of thecatholicthing.org, Robert Royal. Bob, thanks for being here.
Raymond, always a pleasure.
I want to jump right into this. Archbishop Ganswein, of course, was the personal secretary to Benedict XVI. He continues to be head of the papal household under Pope Francis. So if anybody knows about the nature of this papacy, odd as it might be, it is Georg Ganswein. He said this, and we'll put it up on the full screen. He spoke of Benedict XVI's retirement, and he said, he left the papal throne, and yet, with the step he took on the 11th of February 2013, he has not abandoned this ministry. He has built a personal office with a collegial and synodal dimension, almost a communal ministry, which means co-workers of the truth. They are not two popes, but de facto an expanded ministry with an active member and a contemplative member. What does this mean? Bob Royal, is this a new understanding of the papacy? Are they one pope?
Yeah, I think we want to be careful with the language here. First of all, we assume that he's reporting what he's discussed with a pope, but I don't think we should automatically assume that he's got every detail of this.
Well, he lives with Benedict in a very small house.
He uses this idea. He uses this term, the Petrine ministry, munus in Latin. So it's a little bit different than the papacy, and he goes into great pains to say there are not two popes. You know, there are these two different dimensions. But at the same time, he says this is something new in the 2,000-year history of the Catholic Church.
Right, and he says he couldn't renounce the ministry.
Right.
Well, wait a minute. I thought that's what he did.
You know, I think there are a lot of things involved here, and we're dependent on translations. We don't know exactly what he means renouncing, because if I remember right, the Latin term he used was something like rinunciare.
Right.
And it may have had a technical sense. But we know that Benedict, that Papa Ratzinger, is a very, very astute man, and he's not given to a lot of self-deception and you know, impulsive acts. So he must have thought this through fairly carefully. I still believe, I've thought this since way back when, that he saw the deterioration of John Paul II. John Paul II, the beautiful way that he died, the heroic way that he died, he said, you know, Christ does not come down from the cross. Right. But I think at the same time, Papa Ratzinger said, the Church as an institution suffers when the Pope is not able to function as an administrator. So I think that was his primary motive. We also learned in this same lecture that it was not that he wanted to renounce the papacy. He says it was not that there were scandals in the Vatican, but that he felt too weak. And in fact, when we first assembled our conclave crew back in 2013, I went to see my friends at the Swiss Guard, and they said, look at the videos. You can see a year prior to 2013, he was much more vigorous. By 2013, there seemed to be a tremendous drop-off in his energy.
So why is Ganswein so close to Benedict, so close to Francis, saying something like this? Some have hazarded to me, perhaps, there is an international upsetment, confusion at the moment among the laity, because of some of the pronouncements. There was going to be a study on female deaconesses, the outcome of the family synod, and that perhaps this is Benedict's way of communicating it's okay, the church is stable, and I'm praying for everybody, and that's the message. Do you think there might be any validity to that?
Well, there's so much in play here that who knows? You know, he seems to not want to comment on the papacy of Francis, I think because of the gentlemanly type that he is, and just because of the good order of the church. He doesn't want to get involved in that. And people are so on edge. You know, they're on edge in our political system here in America. They're on edge about the church. And this was a big change. This was something new. And we feel that there are so many other things that are new that are in the papacy. So you might be right. This is maybe some way to keep people from having a sense of panic.
Yeah, and Georg Ganswein, Archbishop Ganswein, went through great pains to differentiate Benedict's situation from Celestine V's, who was the last guy to pronounce the throne.
Yeah, I mean, it's actually somewhat humorous because Celestine V was a monk and was forced to become pope against his will, as was Ratzinger to a certain extent.
Yeah.
He wanted to go back to Germany.
Well, he did it the other way around. He was a pope who became a monk.
But, Celestine V, che fece il gran rifiuto, Dante says. He made the great, the great refusal. Is famous, and then he's also famous because the pope that followed him, Boniface VIII, was the nemesis of Dante, who tried to get him condemned to death and exiled and whatnot. So that was a lot of turmoil at that.
So what are you saying, Bob?
I'm a scholar.
You're making a historical comparison. Be careful after a renunciation of the office.
Right. And look, it is going to be something that's striking, just like an ecumenical council. The church changes things. That these are people think it's just like one CEO taking over from another, but it really has a deep spiritual and social dimension to it.
I have to get into something that received very little attention. Back in March, Benedict XVI made a comment during an interview, and he said that there is a deep double crisis in the church today because people believe one can be saved without any belief in Jesus Christ. In fact, it's not necessary. Why do you think that got so little coverage, and why is that an important observation?
Yeah, it's curious that interview was released in March. It's actually part of a book that goes back to last fall about justification and some technical theological issues. But what he says there, I think, is quite remarkable because he wants to point to the fact that there are two things that have happened to the Catholic Church since Vatican II. And he actually refers to Vatican II, which has led some people to say, is he rejecting Vatican II? Is he affirming Vatican II? One thing he says is that there has been this loss of an idea of a universal missionary activity. The end of the Gospel of Matthew. Go forth and proclaim the gospel to all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. He said that as the world, during the age of discovery, as people discovered these peoples that were previously unknown, it forced a change in dogma and actually a change in theology. Yeah. So, was God active among them? Sure, but still, is that universal mission available? Is it something that we ought to be promoting vigorously? But, and I think this might even be more important, the internal part of Catholicism has gone into this second crisis, he says, because even Catholics now start to say to themselves, well, I don't need, if the other people don't need the church, I don't need the church, I don't need the sacraments, I don't need confession, communion, all those things. And so it's not only that we're not evangelizing, even our own people feel weak about the mission of what the church itself is.
Final question. I have to ask you about this other big story that has been really dominating a lot of the coverage coming out of Rome since he said it. The Pope met with women religious leaders. A question came up about deaconesses, female deacons. He said he is open, and indeed they will have a study looking into this particular role in the church and the history of female deacons. Hasn't this question already historically been settled? There have been other commissions that have already looked at this during the last two papacies.
Yeah, a friend of mine, Charlotte Allen, wrote a beautiful piece on the First Things website. She's a scholar of the early church, and she knows what deaconesses really were back in the early centuries of the church. And she says they were not, part of those stages you go through to become a priest, which is really what a lot of the women religious who are pushing for this are really looking for. What they were, she says, and these modern women are not going to like it, were more like nuns. They were either widows or they were unmarried, and they carried out certain functions. For example, baptism used to be total immersion. Right. So if adult women were going to be baptized, it was thought that it was just more seemly for women deaconesses to help
to do the dip.
To do the dip. They didn't actually baptize them sacramentally, but they physically carried them through this. So. Yeah, this has been settled. Again, I think one of the reasons why people get nervous about this, and Francis has said explicitly, one of his principles is that time is more important than space. He doesn't want to decide issues. He wants to start processes. And given the minefields that are out there in the church and in the world, to start some of these processes makes people very, very nervous.
A little edgy. Bob Royal, thank you so much for being here. You can find Robert Royal's insightful columns and commentary at thecatholicthing.org. And don't forget to pick up a copy of Bob's book, which is really incredible and must-reading for anybody interested in the Catholic intellectual tradition in the 20th century. It's called A Deeper Vision. It's available at bookstores everywhere and online. Grab a copy.